Good morning. Today, Thursday, June 6, 2024. We're finishing the second book of Tanya. We did the first book, 53 chapters, so it's pretty thick. That's on the book of InBetweeners, that basically talks about anatomy and physiology of God, as we call it, so to speak. That's books by Chaim Miller on Shnei Zalman's Tanya. And the first book, thick one like that, talks about basically different types of individualities in us. The tzaddik, Rasha, incomplete tzaddik, incomplete Rasha, and in-betweener, which most of the people are in-betweeners. And it talks about relationship between the person and God. It talks about relation between people, person to person. The second book of Tanya, 12 chapters, much thinner. That's about gateway to unity and faith. That goes a little bit deeper. Historically, this book Rabbi Shnei Zalman wrote first, but then I think commentaries here tells us that he felt it's maybe a little bit too philosophical, too esoteric, and most people probably have difficulties relating to that. So he made it volume number 2, starting with the volume number 1, which is easier to relate to. So volume number 2, we went essentially through the first book talks about the connection between person and God, the unity of God, non-duality of God. The second book talks about essentially, goes deeper. It talks about methods, how that interaction actually goes deeper into describing the soul in terms of 10 sfirot, 10 characteristics, goes through a debate between Kabbalists, whether sfirot actually real, so to speak, or are they just description, metaphorical description of God's characteristics. The last 2 chapters, with it, chapter 11 and 12 of Tanya, reemphasizes again the four levels of our thought process, so to speak. The whim, quote unquote, the whim, the feel, the pre-thought process, then the thought, then the speech and the action. And its analogy, we go with the pre-thought to the action, and in order for us to reach God's, that unique connection, we can even get to the point of that whim on the level of upper chokhmah. And then it says that for God, that actually the expression, the thought, expression of God's speech, and his pre-thought, his whim, is beyond our reach. And Tanya calls that, that's on the, that has to be taken by faith. So Tanya came to the point that it explained a lot, made an analogy between 4-dimensional world. I made an analogy between me and my hand, the feeling of mother attachment to the baby, that feeling beyond thought. And made similarities why God made us in His image, because God similarly relates to the universe, similarly, but yet on a much higher, infinite level. But the books, both first and second books, made it a little bit easier for us to, if not see it, to at least to say, I got it. There is something like that, and it's a similar step from a chokhmah to infinity as it is from us, from here to chokhmah. Talks about 4 worlds, from Ein Sof coming down from Atzilut, Beriah, Yetzirah, and Asiya. The chapter 11 and 12, finishing the books by talking about the letters, the 22 letters. We have 22 letters of alphabet, and those 22 letters also belong with God. When you probably heard in Kabbalah, in Zohar, that God created the universe with 22 letters, that talks just like an earthly Torah is a connection to the divine Torah. God has a Torah, it's not physically the book that he's reading like we have. It's a much more esoteric value, but essentially from that emanates the earthly Torah, and we discussed it in our 95, today is 96 recording. And similarly, the 22 letters of God and 10 emanations, the 10 commandments, 10 commandments are written on the 2 tables that Moses received. That's also 10 commandments were all uttered in one breath of God, so to speak. And by now, if you listen to 94 previous recordings, you understand what do we mean by breath of God, by the speech of God, by the thought of God. Human Chokhmah is the pinnacle of creation and the closest thing in our universe to God. But it is nevertheless a creation, and therefore, by definition, it must be separate from God. Well, nothing is separate from God, but just from our understanding, even Chokhmah is something that is, for God, is nothing compared to His infinity. For us, it's infinity almost. The divine letters are 22 different channels of energy. It's a channels of energy. And then, of course, when we talk about written letters, the shape of the letters, the form of the letters, they open, some of them open, some of them, like Samech, are enclosed. There is a certain meaning of the energy emanating. And the combination of these letters and combination create words, and words create sentences. And from those words and sentences, God created the entire universe. So that those letters are actually energies. So God, when you say God has Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, and so forth, that's not to think like we have physically letters like we have in a book. That is, they do emanate from a godly, divine letters. But those are energies, 22 energies coming down to us. And the first book and the second book is going through details to explain how does this energy comes down, how does it go through this world, where the transition from infinity to finite happens. Those are 94 recordings, 96 now recordings talk. Sefer Yetzirah, that traditionally Abraham wrote, Sefer Yetzirah, goes to detailed analysis of these letters, makes this anatomy of these letters. It talks about different, the book talks about different 10 firmaments. The curtain, we heard the expression, I heard behind, angel says to another angel, I heard behind the curtain. Well, that's a figure of speech or a curtain which can be rolled up and down to receive divine light. Then Rakia, the skies, where the sun, moon, and stars are found. Then Shechakim, the heights, and on it goes about 10. There's several descriptions. Did I say 10? I mean 7 firmaments, 7 skies, 7 firmaments. And then God uses the dew that the Holy One used to revive the dead. That's in Talmud in Chagiga. And talks about that Rabbi Dov Ber described the reasons for the shape of the letters, which are supernal lights. 7 firmaments. It talks about, again, it makes another example how the light of God comes to us. We talk about being filtered, being dim, having aperture. And talks about another example, how the moon shines the light on us at night, but the moon is just a reflection of the sunlight. Sun beams at the moon reflects it to us, and we see this light. This is light of the sun, but it came from the moon. We think the moon gave it to us. That's from our perspective. Moon gives us light at night. Well, actually, the sun gives us that light. That's another analogy for the anatomy and physiology of the Almighty. The third book. Now we're studying the third book, also small. It's similar to book number 2, and it's called Letter of Repentance. Letter of Repentance, part 3, and the final book of Tanya. And so as we understood connection between us and God, we understood in the second book the dynamics, anatomy, and physiology of how God's actions and different energy operate. We're now saying, what do we do about it to make our life more fulfilled? How do we bring the light from the heavens down to the darkness? Today's world, with all these crises, wars, unfairness, anger, violence, is another reminder for us of necessity to do that. Essentially, it's all predicted. The history comes into a point that people call it Messianic times, where what Tanya was talking about, what the Torah was talking about, what our Holy Scriptures were telling us coming to fruition, the light becomes brighter, the darkness gets darker. For now, instead of light illuminating darkness, that still separation was happening, and now the separation of darkness and light, before it was mixed, before the October 7th horrific events that happened in Israel. Before that, people sort of like, which side you're on? I don't know what side you're on. People are busy with jobs and their work and families, but now a lot of it becomes clear. So the light now is beginning to shine. We're watching that now, the creation process. That's creation process. Now we see it in time from our world, but in reality it's just unfolding of the prophecies. Now the light is beginning to illuminate the darkness. The darkness is thick, it's dense, it's ignorant, it's arrogant in many cases, which we see on college campuses, we see all over the world, but eventually, gradually, it becomes understood. And of course, we say in our prayers, God doesn't desire the destruction of the wicked, it desires their repentance. So more and more people are beginning to understand through this crisis, through this darkness. So darkness was sent in order to understand what the light is. The more contrast between darkness and light, the more potential. It's like voltage. The more potential builds before the storm, and then the thunder and lightning comes through, and the light begins to illuminate the darkness. So repentance is one of the elements. That's the book of repentance, the letter of repentance, the third book, which we're going to start writing tomorrow, that talks about how do we fix our problems, how do we bring that actual light to the world, starting from ourselves, doing self-analysis, and make this world a better place. And with that, have a great day. And tomorrow we'll be beginning book number 3. Have a great day.